Hello students, welcome to the Fourth Writers Workshop. Today I'm going to talk about how to find sources and how to get into using your sources. And this is just going again to be the basics here, but very important because I'm sure, as you know, many college papers are going to require that you use sources that you bring into your paper, and of course you'll have to comply with APA with this as well. So in this writer's workshop I'm really just going to focus on the finding of the sources and getting into using them a bit, and then in another writer's workshop I'm going to talk about how you get the material out of your sources and into your paper. So going to go ahead and get started. Well, let's see, you're out there looking for sources, and unfortunately some people actually think that if you get it off the internet it's okay to use in a college paper, and that is not true. So you definitely want to move away from just like Googling for things. You want to find what we call academic sources, and these are sources that have been reviewed and approved in terms of their quality, that they were written by people with strong credentials, and thereby this makes them worthy to actually be in a college paper. So if you're out there just looking on the internet for sources, you definitely don't want to do that. You definitely don't want to Google for sources, or certainly you don't want to go on to Wikipedia or things like that to find sources, because those just simply are not academic sources. Now, there's nothing wrong with using things like Wikipedia just for your own personal knowledge. I think we all use things like that these days, but you don't put sources like that into a college paper. So let's talk about how you do it. So at Belhaven we have a great online library that has databases, and databases are essentially different places where you can go and you can find resources for academic papers. Belhaven subscribes to many databases. I'm going to suggest a few that will work most of the time, but the first thing I wanted to give you just some directions for finding them, because a lot of times students don't even really know how to find the databases on the Belhaven website. So notice your directions here. You just go to the main website, hover over academic, you'll see the drop-down library, click on that. And then you'll also see it drop down to databases, click on that, and then you'll be able to kind of scroll through the databases to begin your searching. You are going to see a lot of them. So again, I'm going to talk to you here in a minute about some that you can kind of go to for most of your searching. Once you click on a database, you will be asked to sign in with your credentials. So just so you know, eventually you are going to have to use your student ID and your password for that. And then you'll be able to just kind of start searching for topics and titles in the search bar and begin reviewing articles. So that's very fundamental to knowing how to find good sources for your papers in college, is to actually know how to find the databases. So I would suggest that after this writer's workshop, go ahead and use those directions and just start looking around. So these are some popular databases that are actually on the Belhaven website and in our collection of databases. Academic Search Complete, sometimes that's referred to as EBSCO. Business Source Complete, and again if you're in business courses. Education Sources Complete, Source, and that's an EBSCO database. And then finally Full Text Finder. Those four right there are great for most students in most courses who are doing research. Those are just kind of popular ones that will help you get started. They're easy to navigate. They have all kinds of topics. Most of their articles, or many of their articles, are full text articles. We're going to talk about that a bit more in a minute, but you have to use full text articles when you do your research. So if you need a place to start, go to those first. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about narrowing your search. If you just put in, once you pull up say you're using one of the EBSCO databases, if you just put a word in there like college students, something like that, you're probably going to get thousands of hits, thousands of resources that are going to pop up. Well, who wants to read that many, right? And who has time for that? So you want to make your search as narrowed as possible. So remember, in a previous writing workshop, I talked about the idea of high school teachers should be trained to teach reading better to their students. Well, let's say I put a few more words in here, like college students, reading problems, that type of thing. That's going to get me a much more narrowed selection of articles to look through and make that much more manageable. So part of finding good sources on the databases is just knowing how to narrow your search, because you do not want 1,000 articles to go through. You know, you want just a nice selection that you can work with that relate to your topic. You know, and another point to make too is that sometimes students have expectations of research which are not realistic. You know, research takes time, and sometimes students get frustrated once they're into it and they realize that this is going to take hours and hours, and that's just the reality of doing research and finding good sources. So I encourage you to narrow your search as much as possible so you don't feel overwhelmed with so many things to look through. The more you can narrow it and get it down to, you know, a handful of good articles that you think would potentially work, I think the less frustrated you will be. But on the flip side of that, the other point is research takes time, and you have to prepare for that. So if you have a paper that needs sources, you cannot start looking for those the night before a paper is due. And hopefully in your classes, and I'm sure that this is true, your professors are reminding you about deadlines. They're working with you to help you find sources. Your professors can be good resources for helping you search, those types of things. But as you know, in college, you are going to have to act independently as well. So that's why I'm taking time in this writer's workshop to kind of review with you some tips of finding those academic sources. So let's say you've actually found an article that sounds interesting and you think that you might want to use it. So here would be an example of an article that I might want to use in that paper that I've used as an example here in the writer's workshops. I want to point out a few things that you want to look at when you're looking for sources. First of all, note the date of publication. Do you notice here it says spring 2017? That's a good thing, because what that tells me is that that is recent research. That is a recent study that took place. When I'm doing research, I want my facts, my statistics to be as current as possible, because as we know, we are living in a world that is changing very rapidly. So if you're writing a paper about a Fortune 500 company, perhaps, you will want up-to-date information about that company, not from 10 years ago, because it'll be out of date. So really look for articles that are very current. Sometimes a professor will say, you know, needs to be from the last 5 years. Depending upon your topic, I think that is a good rule of thumb. Once you get beyond about 5 years, you're really risking that the information might be pretty dated. So always look for the date. That's very important. Do you see at the bottom where it says PDF full text? That tells me that that is an article. If I choose it, I can cite it in my paper because I will have access to the full text of it. Again, you cannot cite something in your paper that does not come from the full text of the article. And sometimes on these databases, you will see that sometimes an article is not available full text. So just move on to something else, because you need things that are available full text. Okay, so let's say I am interested in that article, but I really don't want to invest, you know, an hour of my day right now reading through the whole article, because who has that kind of time, right? Well, there are some tricks. One thing you can do is you can read the abstracts. So if you click on the article title, you will notice that an abstract comes up, and you'll see it there at the bottom. And an abstract is essentially a summary of what is in the article. Those are priceless because you can read that summary and you can get a feel for if that article is worth your time. You know, do you want to actually go back to that article and do a more careful read of it, or is it something that you can kind of move on from? So those abstracts, if you are unfamiliar with them, please use them as you do research. They're big time savers. Now keep in mind, you cannot cite from an abstract. You have to cite things from the actual article, the full text article, but those abstracts are really useful to know if you want to invest a good deal of time looking carefully at the article. So once you pull up an article, on the right side of your screen, you are going to see tools. Let me tell you, these tools are fabulous, but you have to know how to use them. And my suggestion would be to start practicing now before you maybe actually have a paper due, because there is a little bit of a learning curve. The only way to really get familiar with any of this is just to get in there and start playing around. But I wanted to talk about a few of these tools, okay? So you can create a folder of all of your articles, and you can put them in an electronic folder when you use the databases. You can obviously print out your articles. You can email the articles to yourself. I do this all the time. That way I will have, and then I'll put them in a folder, say in my Dropbox. But this is invaluable because then you can save them and you'll have them in your inbox. You can then do something else with them. So you can actually email the articles to yourself. You can obviously save them. But I think my favorite tool here is the one that says Cite. That one is great because what you can do is you click on that and it will show you how to cite that article APA format. And then really all you need to do is simply copy and paste that onto your references page, which I know we haven't talked about that quite yet, but we're getting ready to. You can copy and paste that onto your references page, and obviously you'll have to reformat it so it's the right font and things like that. But it does the citing for you. Now you always want to go over it yourself and check it to make sure that everything is correct in it. But most of the time they are correct or pretty darn close. So that is a great little tool that is actually built into the databases that can help you start building your references page. So I really want you to get in there and start playing around and looking at some articles, playing around with the tools, because that's the best way to learn how to use them. So remember these three basic rules of using your sources. If the source is used in the paper, it must appear on the references page. The references page is just simply a list of the sources used in your paper, and we're going to talk more about that in a minute. Number two, the sources must be either directly quoted or paraphrased in the paper. I'm going to do a separate writer's workshop that specifically addresses quoting and paraphrasing, so hang on for that. And finally, the sources used in the paper must use in-text citation, meaning you've got to cite them within the paper. So they must be on the references page and they must be cited in the paper, okay? All right, so I wanted to just show you a references page because I've talked about how you can use the tools on the databases to find the correct APA citation for that source if you decide to use it in your paper. So you can simply copy and paste it from the database onto your references page, make sure it's formatted correctly, and you've got it, okay? So that's what a correct APA references page looks like. Again, I know we've talked about basic formatting already, so let's have a little conversation about this piece of it. Notice, guys, references, it's not called a references page. You do not put that word page in the title, it's just references. Do you notice how everything is alphabetized? Okay, it's most of the time going to be by the author last name, but whatever is the main word or the first main word of the entry, you alphabetize by that. Do you notice how the first line is at your margin, but the subsequent lines are indented? If you do not know how to do a hanging indent in Word, again, that's something you can easily find the directions for, but you need to do a hanging indent to make sure it all looks neat and aligned like you see there on the page, okay? And notice it's all double spaced, no extra spacing. Okay, sometimes students want to put extra spacing between the entries or something like that. The entire thing is double spaced, so don't forget that rule. So again, those reference page reminders, alphabetical order by the first major word, indent the lines after the first line. The title is references, no page in the title. It's all double spaced. Nothing is bolded or underlined. Okay. So the purpose of this writer's workshop was to get you hopefully excited about using those databases. They are there for you, and that's where you can find your academic sources, and to move you away from, if you are doing this, just kind of randomly looking for sources on the internet. You want to use those databases. All those sources there are great, and they've all been approved as worthy as research material for papers in college. So that's why you want to get used to them. I will tell you that the reading that you will find once you get into academic reading and using those databases, you know, those are scholarly articles, meaning professors or experts in the field, people who study that content for really a living. They're the writers of those articles, and those articles are not the same as like reading an article in a magazine that you might get at the grocery store. They're written at a much higher reading level, so I want to prepare you for that. They will take more time to get through, so don't become frustrated. That's just the nature of using academic sources, and so that's why you don't want to find more sources than you need. You want to do that narrowed search, so you can work with a few sources well, depending upon your assignment. But I do want to prepare you that they're not informally written articles for the mass audience. They're written for academic purposes. But the good news is you will know that you will have excellent sources for your paper. So hopefully this was a good reminder about using sources, getting used to the databases, really using those excellent academic sources in your writing and your college courses. Take care, and I'll see you in the next workshop.